Hello, is it all right? Okay. Well, it's glad that some of you came back. Once I heard you going on a walk, I thought, well, that's it done for. As is my custom, I usually introduce myself with a little apocryphal story. And there was once this lapsed Adventist who found himself in a pub on a Friday night. And as happens on a Friday night, people get rather sloshed, so to speak. And he was wandering back home this Friday night, and he decided to take a shortcut through a graveyard. And unbeknownst, there was an open grave, and he tripped up and fell in. And, went to sleep, fast asleep there in the bottom of the hole there. And Saturday morning, or a little bit later on Saturday morning, the bell ringers came out and start practicing their bells. And so the fellow wakes up and jumps up and looks around and he says, "Glory, hallelujah. It's the resurrection day and I'm the only one up." Well, think about it. What kind of theology would it be if there was a resurrection day and you were the only one up? Would you have been actually doing your job? Would we have been achieving our mission if you were the only one? And sometimes Pastor Sweeney, Ian, in his sermon this morning, talked about the giving as a relationship. And the point of what we do, what we achieve, is to be a community. And if on the resurrection day there is no resurrection of a community, then somehow something has gone drastically wrong. You know, many of the things that we talk about, whether it's tithe, whether it's the health message, a lot of our belief, it's about us going to heaven. And, sometimes when you hear about, you see the saints in Sainsbury's and they're going around and checking all the labels to make sure that they're going to be the healthiest person out. Going back to the graveyard, some of us will be raised up as the healthiest stiff in the graveyard. It's not about us as individuals, it's about us being community, us being a fellowship of people. And so reflecting on what I might offer today, what does it mean to be a treasurer? What does it mean? I was just reflecting with Marcus earlier today when we used to travel together. We were in Glasgow one day, and Marcus was preaching. And again, I don't know why sort of drunk people is sort of becoming a bit of a theme, but there was a drunk person who wandered into the back of the Glasgow church and started making a bit of a racket. And Marcus was keeping going and holding his own, and myself and one of the deacons tried to sort of shepherd this fellow out the back door. And he braced himself up big, and he looks at me in the eyes, with this sort of glazed look, and he says, "Hey, who are you?" I guess the question is, ask yourself the question, who are you? Well, it doesn't really ring through, and they just sort of stand up and say, "Well, I'm the treasurer of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, didn't you know?" It doesn't ring. But who are you? What does it mean to be a Seventh-day Adventist treasurer. And so I thought I'd put a few ideas together, and to make it simple for us all, instead of using numbers, which, as treasurers we normally use, I thought, well, we'll go for the literary form and we'll do an A to Z quickly. So the first thing that we are as treasurers is that we're accountable. And learning to be accountable is a key skill. There are many occasions in which we've come across where treasurers do not regard themselves as accountable other than them to themselves, and they manage or like to manage or think they can manage through stealth. Whatever money's in the church, whatever's being given, whatever's being expended, it's a secret that they hold close to their own chest. And as treasurers, we are accountable to God, to the people that we serve, and to ourselves. An attribute, a characteristic of a servant leader is that they are willingly accountable. And so throughout the years, we've tried to make it so that regardless of whether the church board or whether the executive committee meets, we're accountable. You give your accounts, you tell your story to the group of people to whom you should give account. Don't let it be dragged out of you. That just causes conflict. You offer accountability. We're accountable for administering the gifts that God has given. And then B, benevolent. As treasurers, we get this reputation, and it sort of gets drummed into us that we're kind of stingy so-and-sos. You ever come across that one? Yeah, the story I sometimes tell about the circus strongman. How many of you here, have I told you that one before, the circus strongman? Took the lemon and squeezed it and offered $1,000 for anybody get another drop out of the lemon. And the little person comes running out and squeezes it and gets half a glass. Oh, the strongman said, "Can't believe it. How did you manage it?" He said, "You never believe it. I'm a Seventh-day Adventist church treasurer." Yeah, we have this reputation, but as a treasurer, you can choose to be generous. You can choose to have a benevolent mindset. And I tried to remind myself throughout the years that when asked for assistance or help or whatever it is, the answer is yes, but now you give me a good reason. The answer is yes, but now you give me a good reason. And after a while, they get to know they've got to give a good reason, so they work on it. So be aware, as a benevolent treasurer, of the needs of your church and its people. Be aware of the needs of the community that you live in and the community that you serve. Become a generous person by nature, because you've got to keep the flow flowing. If as a treasurer you turn off the tap, the water will stop. It's a cycle, and if you're generous, people will keep on giving. The minute you start saying no, the people will turn stingy on you. See, competence. We're here as a training event. We need continually to be learning our skills. Learn your craft. Learn what the policy is and learn to comply with policy. Learn to comply with accounting principles. I got an email just 2 weeks ago, I think it was, from a colleague in America, and he'd had a story from, as it turns out, Mexico, where somebody suggested the church was doing some unfortunate things, shall we say. They were cheating on the taxman. And as treasurers, we do spend our time learning to comply with accounting principles and the best standards of the law of our country. We learn to comply with the law, including the rules set by the Charity Commission. We become competent in managing the cash flow. And then one of the issues that we have as treasurers, nobody ever comes and asks us for money for bad causes. That doesn't happen. We have to discriminate between the good and the best. Not good and bad, the good and the best. And so being competent to ask the questions, to discriminate, between the good and the best is a skill that you need to learn. There are attitudes out there that say, well, the money's in the bank, we may as well spend it. That's not a really sharp answer. Okay? Will the use of these resources meet and match the mission of the church is the question that you have to ask. And then this is one I always used to find difficult. Being a diplomat is not quite my thing. But within the church, people give us, have all kinds of situations, you hear all kinds of story, and keeping personal matters personal is part of the discreetness and the diplomacy that we need to retain. By the same token, knowing the difference between the private and the personal and the public is where we have to differentiate. We need to make public matters public. In our diplomacy, we need to recognize the diversity of people. Be conscious all the time that everybody's different, everybody has different needs, and be conscious of the needs of other people. And then, naive people deserve dignity. There's a lot of people there that really don't understand the ins and outs of what we do and how the church works. There's some craziness out there, but those people still deserve dignity. I spent the first few years of my life with people trying to calm me down. You've got too much energy. Sit down, boy. Be quiet. Sit down. Well, as treasurer, you need energy. It goes on and on and on. It is relentless. Week after week after week, the paperwork flows in. Treasury work is hard work. It's continuing. It's a grueling cycle. There's no end to it. As treasurers, we have to be proactive. You've got to have energy. And if you're feeling tired, it's time for somebody else to do it. Yeah, that's why we retire. Not quite dead yet, but I can do a bit still. So that's why I'm carrying on a little bit. And then our treasury work requires smarts. Sometimes you don't have to work harder, you just have to work smarter. Look for efficient ways of doing what we're doing. And then one of the tensions that we have in our church, the last general conference meeting, and there was a lot of people got up and said that Christ will return before 2020. There won't be another general conference session. Which, to me as a treasurer, that's great. Can I have your pension fund? There is a tension between our belief in the soon return in Christ and the need to plan for the future. I never imagined as a young person going through college that I would reach retirement age. Yet, as leaders, as treasurers, you've got to ask yourself, where will this church be? What will it look like for your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren? Do you have in mind building the kind of environment, the kind of community that will pass the test of time? Be focused, be future-oriented. Be gracious. was just talking to some folk earlier on. One of the changing points that came to me early on in Treasury in the South England Conference was one of the pastors came in and he dropped a tithe envelope on my desk. It's his wife's tithe, and I opened it up, and the lady that did the receipting wasn't there that day, and so I did the receipt. And when you're not used to it, you see a tithe, a check for, a couple of £100, and the receipt that you write is not a whole lot of reward for a few £100. You think about it. And so I decided to write, "Dear Sister so-and-so, thank you for returning your tithe. God bless you and your dearest," in my own scruffy handwriting on a compliment slip. Well, the pastor came back the next day. He said, "You know what? That is the first time in 40 years that anybody ever said thank you." As treasurers, we need to be the gracious voice of the church. We need to frequently learn to say thank you in various forms to those who give. You can do it by word, in personal, when you see people in church. You can do it by email, by letter, by card, by phone. You can motivate people by the provision of resources. Different ways to be gracious and to show gratitude as a treasurer. And honesty. Kind of goes without saying. We had a presentation a few years ago by Dr. Paulson. He gave us just 3 points. 3 points: honesty, integrity, and vision. So I wrote it down, HIV. But honesty. As treasurers, there are some of our colleagues that kind of have this prophetic version of ideas. As treasurers, we tell the truth. We tell it how it is. We avoid conflicts of interest. At least we try to. Avoid conflicts of interest. Avoid the appearance of evil. Sometimes there are situations where, no harm is intended. Everybody's motive is correct. But you need to know when situations can be misinterpreted. Avoid the appearance of evil. And then don't mix private and personal. Keep your own story and the church's story in totally separate pockets, and don't let things move from one to the other. Not because you're dishonest, but because things will get in a mess. That's what happens. In a similar vein, integrity. Integrity is more about your internal self, being a whole person, about your inner soul, your inner actions. It means that you've got to walk the talk. You've got to ask the questions. What does the Lord require of you? I've got Malachi in the brain from this morning. Micah, chapter 8, there says, what does the Lord require? He requires of us to do justly, to offer mercy, and to walk humbly with our Lord, with our God. They're one of my favorite ones. Treasures, you've got to enjoy a laugh. Don't take yourself too seriously. Because if you do, you'll be disappointed, because there'll be somebody who doesn't like your ideas. Don't take yourself too seriously. Don't take rejection of your ideas personally. And choose as a treasurer to bring joy to wherever you are, to wherever you work. Be a bringer of joy. That's what jovial means, to bring joy and more joy. Then as treasurers, we're keepers of the flame. The church, the Christian fraternity, we have traditions. And there are always people trying to pull down the traditions. But we've celebrated the Reformation recently. We frequently celebrate the continuity of the Bible, God's Word. Keep that flame. It's a precious flame. It's one that's likely to go out. We are keepers of the flame. That long-term view, that long-term future that you see, keep the flame. Keep the flame. Keep the traditions of the church flowing. And then we're listeners. You've got to listen. You know, the word, we have auditors that come and visit us. To audit means to listen. They spend a lot of their time looking but not listening, but that's not what it means. We are listeners. Listen to the heartfelt needs of donors. You know, when you see those tithe and those donations coming in, ask yourself the question, gosh, what's going on in that person's soul for them to continue to make those contributions? Try and listen to what they're saying. Most of you will be opening tithe envelopes from week to week. You know, in the conference office, we don't really see that one. We get pages of them, but you're never going to read it. But you are following much of the time people's patterns and habits. And from time to time, you'll see people, you know, either failing in their own customs. Ask yourself, is there a struggle going on somehow in this person's life? Is it time or opportunity for me to say, how's it going, pal? Anything we can do to help? Listen to the heartfelt needs of donors. Listen for the inspired projects and programs. You've got to listen around the place. Talk to the various leaders in your own church. Listen to the projects and programs that are coming out of the conference, the union and the world field. How is the program that you're negotiating and fitting in with the whole? Somehow in your own head, you've got to tie all of this lot together. And then listen for the moving of God's Spirit. The treasurer, you're a maintainer. You know, going around different churches for the last 30 years. And I guess that we learnt this from the insurance fraternity. You know, you get to the church and you start looking at the gutters. What's happening? You know, I was just at the South England conference on Thursday, and Philip was there fixing the gutters because down the wall there was a whole pile of damp there. You know, people, when they pass our church, is this a well-maintained church, or is it a heap? I was in another church just last week somewhere in the West Midlands. I won't name the church, but you get in the foyer there. It's a tip. You see you see the literature rack there, and it's a mess. Yeah, well, who's looking at it? As treasurers, keep your eyes open and make sure that every part of your church is well made. Whether it's the literature rack or it's the paint job or whatever it is, make sure that your church is worth a second visit. Make sure that your notice board, looks good. Somebody's got to do it, but everybody believes that the maintenance of the church is somebody else's job. Well, as treasurers, the buck stop with us. Just make sure that the church that you attend, for whose stewardship you are responsible, is well maintained. Sometimes, maybe money is a big issue, but draw it to the people's attentions. Are you proud of the mess in this church? Come on, guys, let's make it great. N for narrative. Learn to be a storyteller. What kind of stories are we going to tell? Tell the story of God's working, the outpouring of God's blessing, God's Spirit in your community. You know, you hear a lot, of stewardship narratives, and a lot of the time we try and lay guilt on our members. You know, and let's have a bumper offering. Let's tell them they've got to be more generous. It's the kind of thing that sometimes happened. Better to tell stories of how God has blessed people in your community. Learn to tell those stories, tell them frequently. Become a storyteller. Later on we'll come to trust. It's not far off now. But as a treasurer, openness and transparency. Be open. You know, as treasurers, we're not necessarily the people that are best with arguments. And so the way to win is to sort of keep the books close to your chest. You know, you get the church board, and somebody asks for money, and we've got the numbers close to our chest, and say, "Ooh, dear, oh dear. I'm sure there's not enough money." Deal with the argument as it's presented. If it's a good idea, find ways of presenting it. Choose to be an open book. The resources that are given to church, not your resources. The board wants to spend it on something crazy. Well, I guess they do. And from time to time, they do go off piste, shall we say. But be open about the working of the church. Tell people about their giving. Tell them about the use of the resources. Tell them about the complexities of the decisions that you have to make. You know, it's very easy to be critical of various parts of the church and the decisions that they come to. But most of the decisions that we take and we come to, the important ones, are complex decisions. Many people will have gone through a lot of soul searching over many of the decisions. Tell people about the complexity and the soul searching that you went through to arrive at the decisions to people. People should become confident about the pathways and the processes that are involved in running your church. Be open and transparent. Be present. You know, one of the curses of our society, it's becoming a standard joke, is when anything's happening in the room, we're all on our little machines, doing something else. You get in the committee and everybody opens their laptop and they're straight into their email and doing everything else. Be present. Be alert. The essence of Emmanuel, the word Emmanuel, means God with us. God is present and alert. And in the various situations that we're in, whether it's in the church board or the committees or the church services, whatever it is, as a treasurer, you are present. Not just necessarily physically present, but your mind is focused on what's going. You're alert, aware, and you're participating. Ask questions. There was a fairly famous case in our church not too long ago that went to court. And the treasurer was asked by the judge, why did you agree to this? And his answer was, the president told me to do it. Well, after that we were really in trouble. As treasurers, people will come, particularly pastors, presidents, people with power, will come and present expenses and what have you. It's your job to ask the questions. Ask, what's this about? And there may be occasions where you say, well, I'm sorry, this one's a bit off the beam. Shouldn't happen often, but ask the questions. You may feel intimidated by those who are in positions of power in your church. Doesn't matter. Ask the questions. And sometimes these questions can turn pear-shaped and get very ugly, but ask the questions. Ask the questions. It takes courage. And then as treasurers, we're responsible. We're the people that should be relied on. People's lives, the church's witness, depend on us doing the job the right way and on time. And I guess, one of the joys of not being the treasurer anymore is I don't have to lose sleep like I used to. You'd sometimes wake up and think, there's 1,000 people, 1,000 people whose lives, whose bread and butter actually depend on me and my team, or us and our team, getting this right. And I have this, when you go around the various churches, people sort of tap you on the shoulder. And I remember sitting in Newbold Church one time, and one of the pensioners, I'm sitting there doing my best trying to concentrate on, what's going to happen. And there's this tap on the shoulder. A dear old brother friend, he sort of tapped me on the shoulder and said, well, what about my pension then? There are 1,000 people like that. And there are 38,000 members, whose spiritual welfare and the programs that get run depend on us as treasurers following through, getting the job done and right. And you wouldn't imagine some of the complexities that sort of go through your life as a treasurer. I remember, I think I was preaching in Stoke-on-Trent one Sabbath. And Stoke-on-Trent is where my parents pastored when I was a kid in the 1950s. And kind of all kinds of thoughts go through your mind when the clock goes back that far. And it happened to be the week after Fred West and Rosemary West had been caught for doing their dastardly deeds, and their house was right next to our church in Gloucester. And I'd had a letter from the police that week, and they wanted me to indemnify them for any damages that they would do digging up the West garden. I thought, well, hang on a minute. If they go and wreck the Gloucester church, well, you don't want to say no to the police. And we went backwards and forwards. It took me a whole week's work just to resolve the issue between the Gloucester police and the authorities and the lawyers and all the rest of it. And when I'm in Stoke-on-Trent, I thought, do these people really know, the background stories of what goes on, just so they can kneel on their knees and say their prayers? But as treasurers, we're responsible, we're reliable, people depend on us. None of us is alone. We are an interdependent community. This quarter, we're all studying stewardship. Very much appreciate Pastor Sweeney's story this morning, his presentation about the obligations of the member in returning their tithe. But you get the reverse picture when you're the treasurer. Because the burden of being the steward of stewards is kind of like a double whammy. We as treasurers have to be doubly conscious, having reminded people of their need to be stewards. We have to be even more greater stewards to take care of what people have given and their whole spirit. So we are first a steward. servants of the cross. And, there's nothing like holding the checkbook to sort of give you a sense of power. Or the church's or the conference's credit card. It's, yeah. Avoiding the arrogance of kingly power has to be a conscious decision in the mind of every treasurer. Remind yourself every day that you're a servant and a steward. Servant leaders operate and offer service rather than exercising control. And then the theme that I've worked with and enjoyed thinking about for certainly the last 25 years. I remember when I'd finished my course at Hatfield Polytechnic, as it was then, Hertfordshire University, and I wanted to do further studies, and the professor asked me, well, what do you want to study? What will you do your thesis on? And the idea that I wanted was to work on the idea of trust. And he said to me, well, yeah, what's that about? How is that a business or an economic issue? And so I went on to explain a little bit. And I said, yeah, I suppose it is. Now, 25 years, everybody is talking about it. And you look at the issues with Oxfam and Save the Children. Trust is a huge issue in the enterprises that depend on, every enterprise. And the important thing with trust, of building trust, is not to get people to trust you, nice as that may be, but trust is the chemistry of our community. As treasurers, your task is to build social capital. And the question that we have this morning is, we quoted a lot this morning, Malachi chapter 3, and this promise of a blessing. And we mentioned that the Adventist Church is not into the prosperity gospel. But you still ask the question, is this promise of a blessing real, or is it a massage? And the blessing that all of us receive comes about largely by being part of a community. And communities operate on the basis of trust. And every young person growing up in your church, in our community, should first believe, yes, that they can trust their mom and dad. They have this trust in their family members. And there are some cultures where trust never goes further than families. But learning to trust the larger community, the church is a halfway house. And so by developing a community that young people growing up can intimately trust, they learn that most people are ultimately good. Most people can be depended on. Most people will do what they say they will do. That is your spiritual calling as a treasurer. It's not just about writing bits of paper and having a nice balance sheet at the end of the quarter or wherever it is and doing all the accounting nicety. The purpose of all of your reporting is to build that trust, to build that community based upon which people can learn to prosper. And one of the greatest annoyances, let me say, or fears that I have with some of the theology I hear coming out, the doctrine of fear. You can't trust anybody. There's a papist behind every lamppost. What does that do? What does that do if you're already a member of a community that already feels besieged. If you happen to come from a minority community or part of the community, adding to that fear has the purpose and the effect of impoverishing yourself and those people. And that's serious. Building a community of trust. People who trust amongst themselves, but because of the confidence that they've been brought to by the church, they can trust even beyond into the greater community. That's our spiritual calling. We are builders of social capital. You know, they're not taught about we're capitalists. Well, capitalist is just you reserve what you have. And the quality and the strength of our community, our society, is built on organizations, groups of people like ourselves, people who believe in each other. Become a trusted, trustworthy treasurer. Be a trust developer. Then understanding. We said earlier on that we're into relationships. Everything is about relationships. Everything comes in the in-between. The relationship between us, there's a magical chemistry between all of us. And understanding how people fit together, how the processes of our church fits together, how we're all interconnected. I think I was just talking to Earl on, was it Thursday I was talking to you? Thursday, Friday, Wednesday? Wednesday. One of the days this week. Yeah, he was moaning that one of the conferences hadn't got their report in for December. I won't say which one it was. And I'm kind of laughing. I said, yeah, you see? The boot's on the other foot now. You know, I mean, the net effect was that he needed the numbers because the division needed the numbers because the General Conference needed the numbers. And believe it or not, the General Conference puts together a whole book of all this data. I mean, what they need it for, I don't know. But, well, I do, I suppose. But anyway, we all work together as a system. And everything you do, somebody else depends on that. In turn, somebody else depends on that. And understanding the relationships between all of us. It's very easy for you as a local treasurer to say, well, you know, we do things our way here. Well, you might get a cheaper deal locally sometimes, but when you put everything together, we achieve more by doing things together. And you have to think local, but you have to understand the greater picture. And learning to understand that greater picture, how things relate and work together, is part of your learning. And then vision. How do you imagine your church to be in 30 years' time? You know, it's 31 years since I started at the South England Conference. So, you know, it's not that outrageous for me to ask, how will it be in 30 years' time? Well, maybe it doesn't matter to me. I'm more than likely going to be dead by then. Well, you know, my dad's still alive, so maybe I might make another 30 years. I don't know, like him, but I doubt it. You know, he's skinny and I'm fat, so got to knock off a few years. But how do you imagine your church to be in 30 years' time? Will you be the cohesive kind of group of people? Will there be a commonality and a joy and a love? The kind of church where people kind of just queuing up to get in? Or do you see in 30 years' time, you know, the tap being turned off and your church being drawn and sort of ending up like a dried prune? Does your passion for the imminent return of Christ blind you to the future for your great-grandchildren? You say it's impossible, lack faith. Well, my dad's got great-grandchildren now. He didn't believe it would work out that way. We have to look into the future 30, 20, 30, 40, 50 years' time. How will what we're doing now work out for us in the foreseeable future? What picture do you have in your mind? Is the picture that you have sustainable? You know, getting a bit of an old codger now. It's nice to talk about the past. But you've seen trends come and go. And it's kind of a strange thing when you've been through an Adventist college and you see all, the youngsters at your college, and they're all, goody-goody two-shoes, I'm going to be pastor, And then you look 30 years later. What happened? Hello? Is the way you practice your faith sustainable? Are you so perfectionistic? Is your vision so perfectionistic that you're almost bound to fail? Or is your vision of a community, that makes mistakes, but forgives one another? What is your vision for your church for the future? What do you have in your mind? Do you have a picture of the Garden of Eden? Or do you imagine Armageddon? It's 25 years ago, around Stanborough Park, there was an event that happened somewhere else in the world, Waco. And people in our street and around thought Stanborough Park was another Waco. They'd sort of see the fence around our place. We were all hedged in, and people would say, Waco. Ouch. That kind of hurt. And so when we rebuilt the office, we made sure that some of that fence came down, so the view that people get looking in is more Garden of Eden than Armageddon. What picture do you have in your mind? Wholesomeness. Wholesome, we are together. We are one. For us, only the best will do. Apostle Paul says, whatsoever things are pure. Sounds like the end of term. The headmaster used to always give us this one just before we went on holiday. Whatsoever things are pure. Whatsoever things are of good report. If there be any virtue, if there be any praise, then think on these things. As treasurers, look for the wholesome solution. Which of the options available will bring us together? Which of the options available will make us the healthiest community that we can be? One of my frustrations in recent years, it kind of gets you after a while. And one of the things I'm glad I don't have to do anymore is go to a committee every Sunday. These guys still enjoy doing it. Scotland, Ireland, Wales, weekend. South, North. It's 5 weekends in a row. And then you finish that one and you go round again. I don't know if it's the nature of committees where they attract issues. But everywhere you went, there was some argy-bargy. You go to one of them and there's somebody arguing about Christmas trees. And you say, holy moly, get a life. There are thousands of people dying in Syria this week, and you're fussing about get a life. Are we as a people the most wholesome people? Or do we spend our lives arguing about stupid things? Huh? Tell you, man, let's grow up. Let's grow up. Wholesomeness. Struggling a bit with X. Treasures, you will be examined. There is a test. And at the end of the year, the audit will happen. And I always imagine, in my head, the audit is like the Day of Atonement, the Day of Judgment. You know, they'll come in and the books will be opened and they go through. You know, when you're conference treasurer, union treasurer, whatever, there's a lot of lots of bits of paper they're going to go through. And every day the paper crosses your desk and you just sign it and hope for the best. You know, will the auditors pick on the one that you didn't quite scrutinize as well as you should have done? The audit will happen. Our work will be reviewed and our accounts should reflect best practice. We do the best that we can. The way that we record, that we report, should follow best practice. We don't do it that way because we'll be examined, but because we value excellence. We want to do the right thing because it is the right thing. Again, this may be repeating a little bit. Be young at heart. Don't lose your sense of humor. See the world through the eyes of youth. It's a great thing to be. In the last couple of years, I've become a grandfather. You try and see this little 2-year-old. How does she see this? And what's the impact of all of this stuff on a 2-year-old or a teenager? And you know, it does become the case, and I've seen it too often where, well, maybe we've gone too far the other way. We talk about the youth as being snowflakes and what have you, and maybe we indulge them too much. But nevertheless, the future is theirs. We need to try and see the future and the world through the eyes of young people. We need to create the church that young people will come to relish for years to come. An environment that's sustainable for them, that they can enjoy, that they will be proud of. And when you hear about all this nonsense of bickering and groups having a go at each other over this, that, and the other, how does that play through with the kids? How does that play through with the kids? Create the people, the church, that young people will relish. And then finally, you knew Zed was coming. Be zealous. Keep your enthusiasm for your work. For God's purpose breeds confidence and success. Enthusiasm brings joy. Enjoy every minute of it. Thank you.